So the first part that we need to think about is the know your customer, know your client process. So how, and that gives you also a sense of how the system will work. Well, we believe it starts with that a person needs a CBDL wallet, right? So now you think of a wallet as the physical device, but what really is, it is an app on your cell phone. This app can be developed in the in an app store. It's possible that you can also get this app and download it and have it sent to you if you want by your banks, if they want to provide a branded service. Importantly though, the banks would at that point not be involved in the processing. It's still a single system operated by, you know, a public utility of some form. Anyway, so what it really would mean is you go to an app store, you download the app. The app is akin and similar to being an account if you want. Meaning now an account is really just a collection of letters and numbers that signifies this particular wallet. Now what needs to happen is that this wallet is authenticated as being used by somebody who is a legitimate user, aka you or me. So for that you have to go through what's referred to as a know your client process. So you would take this number and you go to, say, a provincial service agency. You can do it with Canada Revenue Agency. You can also do it with some of the services that are already provided by the big banks and say, this is me, you know who I am. This is my wallet ID, please authenticate it. And that would then happen is that the authenticator would put this information and forward it to what's we refer to as a whitelist. So that is a list which lists all of the authenticated wallet addresses. Now, there would also be a mapping in the sense of that this list would contain some information of who put the information there, but critically, that piece of information would not have directly identifiable information about the individual. Why? Well, to increase privacy. What would happen is if you do a transfer, the entity that does the transfer would check against this whitelist and make sure that the entity that used it is a legitimate user, and that's it. Now this transaction processor has to do AML checks, so it's anti-money laundering checks. That will happen in the background. And unless there is some form of court order or a trigger for violations of money laundering, nothing else will ever happen. If there is such a trigger, then they would have to go through the whitelist back to the original issuer to reveal the identity and then to take further steps in order to investigate if there indeed was a violation of money laundering or some other illegal activity. It would also allow, of course, with court orders, you can block accounts and so on and so forth. But the critical part is there's an enormous degree of privacy, which is way more than what you currently have in your banks or in any other payments processing services. Now let me explain to you how we envision that the transfer of a CBDL would work. It starts with the merchant. The merchant will set a set of instructions, aka their wallet address and how much money they want from you, and send it and give it to you. This could be as simple as a piece of paper with a QR code or even an electronic version of a QR code. It depends on what kind of arrangement that is being picked. You scan this with your phone. You then digitally sign a transaction. That will be essentially the same thing as using your thumbprint reader. It could be a PIN number, it could be a Face ID, whatever system is set up by the wallets. That could be completely agnostic to different technologies that exist. The important part is it will be a digitally signed and thereby cryptographically secured signature will be sent with all the instructions of the transactions to a transactions processor. This transactions processor checks against the whitelist to make sure that both the recipient and the sender are legitimate entities. And if everything checks out, the transfer happens and the transaction will then be put into the anti-money laundering monitoring system for as long as it takes, but not any longer. Once the checks are complete, the data will be deleted. That's the idea. Very importantly, to have as much privacy in there as possible, given the current law. Now I want to spend a few seconds talking about offline transfers. As I said before, this is a really hard problem to solve. We believe it is possible with the current technology and secure pieces of hardware that are tamper-proof to do such a thing. So the way it starts with is a person who has a wallet can link their card, an offline card, with that wallet. So that basically is just a form of registration process. Now what they then do is they take their normal wallet and transfer money into the card. What that means is that the transactions processor would create or put CBDLs, which have serial numbers, such as, think about it as tokens, onto that card. And then what you would use is you can use that card to make payments, offline payments, using, possibly, some form of reading device that is able to make these transactions. That's technologically quite advanced, and I have to be honest that you may want to talk to my colleague Andreas Veneris about it, who is the expert. The key thing is here, there's a sequence of transactions that could happen online, offline, and eventually somebody, however, wants to take that money and put it back online. So what they have to do is they have to then say, we transfer the money out of my card that I have and I put it back into my e-wallet that you have with the transactions processor. And that's basically how this would work. Now let me explain to you how this system would fit into the existing world of banking. Because what you want to be able to do is you want to use your account at your commercial bank, right? So like TD, CIBC, RBC, whatever you are, and you want to be able to transfer money into that wallet. How would that work? Well, the way it would work is to use actually the existing banking system. In case you don't know, what happens is, there's a lot of transactions that happen between the banks on any given day. At the end of the day, all of these transactions are netted out, which means basically you add up transfers from bank A to B and B to A, and you see who owes what to who. Those will then be processed in what's referred to as the large value transfer system. And this transactions processor that we have in mind that has all the accounts for all the Canadians would be part of that system. They would have an account with the Bank of Canada so that you can have these transactions which happen from your commercial bank account to this transactions processor. So now this is a critical component. This is legally was actually quite challenging to figure out if it works. We have a very long memo that explains how this is possible, why this is possible, and how it can be done. I recommend that you read it. If you have further questions on the way why we set this up from a legal perspective, also from a functional perspective, please contact Poonam Puri, who is the author of the legal document that is a big part of our design. Now let me talk about the second stage, because at the end of the day, we don't want a situation where a government service takes over a major part of an existing industry, aka the payments industry. That is not the goal. The goal is to set a standard. Now what we have in mind here is that at the second stage, all of the technology and the tools developed in the first stage that enable these transactions will be given to the private sector. And then you build this up into what's referred to as a distributed ledger, sometimes referred to as a blockchain. Importantly, however, this is a permission type, so only trusted entities have the ability to what's referred to as commit transactions in the system. So this transactions processor would become a single node in this system. And think about, there will be a set of new nodes that exist, and all that they do is they basically copy the technology as it is, and of course they can find enhancements. Now these validator entities have the ability to provide services to other entities, and service entities will have the ability after a licensing process to use this blockchain or DLT system to provide services to Canadians. And what then can happen is they could provide any number of innovative services. You can think of commercial entities, of firms, of businesses to use the accounting services. They could collect information for CBDL payments so that a firm can use this, a small firm can use this to obtain credit from a bank, and so on and so forth. There's many things that you can have. You can also think about that an individual may very well be willing to give their data to a particular entity in exchange for a service. Critically, they could do this as, in exchange, and literally exchange for a service, and they would be in control whether or not they would give out the payment data. It wouldn't come as a side product of a new financial infrastructure. So there's lots of different examples that you can think of, Personally, I can't think of all of them, but I'm sure that the private sector has plenty of room to innovate in such a system based on a public infrastructure provided to them. So that, in a nutshell, completes my description of how we believe the system will work. Let me quickly summarize.